So I want to congratulate you for this day of practice. And we're sinking into the retreat a bit. And it was wonderful for me to see half of you today. And I know Jan saw the other half, so we saw all of you today. And just getting a little bit of a little taste, a little contact with you to just get a sense of how it's going. And we know that it's early in the retreat as far as our just about a week here with each other, but we've begun to settle some, and I want to just congratulate you for still being here. And actually, I want to just read you a little poem from Mary Oliver. And she evidently dreamt this poem. This came to her in a dream. And it's called The Uses of Sorrow. And she writes that someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. And it took years to understand that this too was a gift. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness, and it took me years to understand that this too was a gift. So tonight I want to speak about the darkness, and I also want to speak about light. And here's one that speaks about the possibility of light, of illumination. It's from Hafiz, and it says that not many teachers in this world can give you as much enlightenment in 1 year as sitting all alone for 3 to 6 days. You can even just stay in your closet. That would do it. And that means not leaving, and you better get a friend to help you with a few sandwiches, and you better get yourself a chamber pot. No reading, no writing. That would be cheating. Let's aim for the 360-degree detox, though the sitting alone is not recommended if you're normally sedated. But dear one, don't let Hafiz fool you. There is a ruby buried inside here. Don't let Hafiz fool you. There's a ruby buried inside here. So here's this juxtaposition of a box full of darkness. And don't let Hafiz fool you. There's a ruby buried inside here. So I would like to, for us to explore some of the darkness, and perhaps we'll find the light inside the darkness. And the darkness is referring to some of the trials and tribulations, the challenges that come up when we practice meditation. Last night I loved that Jan shared about the mystery. Like, what is this? And I loved how that she framed the mystery with both its light and darkness, if you will. You could say the darkness is the news of the heavenly messages, that the inescapabilities of aging, illness, and death. But also the wonder of the magic of this moment, the magic of this universe. Of course, the fourth heavenly messenger is not so dark at all. It's a beacon of hope, of possibility that maybe there is a way to find peace, to grow in wisdom. So I want to acknowledge also what brings you here, and I think for many of us it is to experience more freedom, to be less burdened. And that's going to involve some investigation. Investigation. It's an inside job. And Perhaps that fourth heavenly messenger that has brought you here, that maybe there is another way. So we're sitting with ourselves and we're going to investigate. And perhaps it can be fueled by what is known, and I just love these words, the love of truth, this wanting to know what's here. This love of truth is something that it's from our own direct experience. Hafiz speaks about, in the spirit of action of Hafiz Kabir, he speaks about this own direct experience where he says that there's nothing but water in the holy ponds, and I know because I've been swimming in them. And all the gods sculpted of wood or ivory, they can't say a word. I know I've been crying out to them. The sacred books of the East are nothing but words. I looked through their covers one day sideways. What Kabir talks about is only what one has lived through, and if you've not lived through something, it is not true. So I love how he's pointing to this being living through something from our own direct experience. From our own direct experience. It is said, actually, in ages ago, that the shamans, they would travel with those that were afflicted. In some ways, you could say, metaphorically, they would travel with them to their hells and back. And how do they learn to travel with them in their hells and back? And that is because they had learned how to travel into their own hells and learn to come back. So we're learning to stay with ourselves, to discover, perhaps, that there is a ruby buried inside here. I think many of you know, quite famous these days, Rumi's poem, The Guest House, about this being human as a guest house in every moment, a new arrival, and then this radical teaching of welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house and empty all of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably, maybe clearing you out for some new delights. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door and invite them in. This seems like a very radical type of teaching. Meet them at the door, invite them in. The shame, the malice, the fear, the dread, meet them at the door. This seems very counterintuitive. But as we sit with ourselves in meditation, it's like at times getting a shot of truth serum. Some ways, if we are really willing to see what's there, it's like walking into a hall of mirrors, starring me, myself, and I. And you might comment on that by saying, I. Me, myself, and I in this hall of mirrors. We see the good, we see the bad, we see the confused, we see the shame, we see the anger, we see the fear, we see the confusion. It's all here. And sometimes as we sit in meditation, things come up even more. It comes up a lot. There's actually kind of a very powerful reading from Francois Fenelon. And maybe some of you can relate to this, because we've been sitting with ourselves and we're looking more closely at what's going on inside. And so he says, as the light of awareness increases, we may see ourselves to be worse than we thought. Anybody relate to that? As the light of awareness increases, we may see ourselves to be worse than we thought, and we're amazed at our former blindness as we see issuing forth from the depths of our heart a whole swarm of shameful feelings like filthy reptiles crawling from a hidden cave. It's kind of a middle-aged poem. We never could have believed we'd harbor such things, and we stand aghast as we watch them appear. And while our faults diminish, the light by which we see them waxes brighter, and we can be filled with horror. So it does get better. It's because he says, bear in mind for your comfort that we only perceive our malady when the cure begins. So I love that. Bear in mind for your comfort, we only perceive the malady when the cure begins. The very fact that we're beginning to see the cure is beginning. And for many of us, we are not accustomed to seeing, to looking inside. I've always found this particular reading or observation to be very sobering and very haunting. And this was written a long time ago in the year 399. It's 2019, so 399 is a long time ago. This was written by St. Augustine. And it's kind of an observation, a comment about his times. It says that people travel to wonder at the height of the mountains, wonder at the huge waves of the seas, wonder at the long courses of the rivers, wonder at the large and vast compass of the ocean, wonder at the circular motion of the stars, and then they walk right past themselves without ever wondering. Walking right past themselves without ever wondering. That was written in the year 399. Walking right past ourselves without ever wondering. And so I want to congratulate and acknowledge you that you're sitting in a meditation retreat is definitely not walking past yourself without one. You're looking inside. And we're not trying to cover it up with beautiful images, and we're really trying to stay with the body, the breath, the feelings, our thoughts and emotions. It's not for the faint of heart, as John Kabat-Zinn would say. And we are not walking past ourselves, so deep bows to you. And it's very amazing to know that there is a perennial wisdom that exists throughout the times. It's found in different spiritual, psychological, philosophical, indigenous, shamanistic, earth-based spiritualities, psychologies, philosophies, about this turning in. This is what we're doing. We're turning in. And it almost at times can feel counterintuitive. It's turning in to what's here, turning into our fear, into our pain, into our challenges. And some of you may have heard this before, but it was a really important teaching for me growing up. And when I was 16, I got my driver's license, and I grew up in the Boston area, and we get quite a bit of snow from time to time. And driving in snow, it takes time to learn how to drive in snow. I can never say I mastered it, but in time I learned a little bit about driving in snow. But as an early driver, getting into skids really scared me. And it felt uncomfortable. I was losing control. And I remember telling my father about this one time, getting into these skids. And he said, Bob, if you want to get out of the skid, you've got to turn your wheels in the direction towards the skid. And that really surprised me. And it also scared me, because didn't he understand I want to get away from the skid, turn into it? Are you crazy? I mean, that was my 16-year-old brain. That was an absolutely crazy idea. So I didn't believe him. And also, I think it's because I was scared to turn into the skid. So I kept on turning away from the skid throughout the winter and kept on spinning my car out. So you get snow occasionally in Denmark, right? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And so I'll never forget this one day. After having turned away from the skid countless times, And realizing that that wasn't going to help, I decided to eensy-beensy little bit to turn my wheels towards the skid. And lo and behold, I couldn't believe it. I could feel the trajectory and the momentum of my car beginning to move towards straightening. It was really remarkable. I couldn't believe it. And I've thought about that incident through the years, and I think that my dad he was teaching me something, maybe even more. How I began to understand it was also a metaphor for life, and that I think it's quite natural living in a pain-denying culture to turn away from our pain. Yet what my father was inviting was to turn into it, or to get away from the fear. But no, he said, like, to turn into the fear. I mean, that's how I began to understand this, that could I begin to turn into my fear, turn into my pain, turn into my sadness, even though it seems and sometimes counterintuitive to turn into those feelings, because everything that I want to get away from those feelings, and I just want to feel good. I just want to go back to the womb where everything was just taken care of. I didn't have to worry about anything. But I'm too big now, I can't fit back in there. The cord has been cut. This turning in is a very revolutionary, very radical notion. And so much of our cultures teaches us to turn away from the pain. And that's true. I mean, who wants to have pain? But yet the pain is there. And what is our relationship to pain? How do we begin to work with pain? Not only physical pain, but emotional pain, anger, sadness, fear, confusion, shame. How do we begin to work with these? And so the practice is inviting us, when these things come up as we're sitting here, is to begin to turn towards them, to begin to acknowledge them. A very important principle that I want to say is the difference between acknowledging what's there or accepting what's there. Sometimes we use those words kind of synonymously. But as we turn into, let's say, something very painful, like our shame, our guilt, we might not be in a position at all to accept it. But perhaps we can be in a position to acknowledge how much I can't accept it. You can see the kind of the difference between the two. And if sometimes we're trying to tell ourselves I need to be okay with what's there, but the truth deep down is I'm not okay with it, can I actually begin to acknowledge how much I'm not okay with what's there? And so I think as far as the practice goes in our wise understanding, it's not necessarily about at times accepting what's there, because it might be unacceptable. But can I begin to acknowledge my grief, my pain, my fear? Acknowledging there's room to feel whatever's present. And in the same way, the differences in language between letting go and letting be. If I knew how to let go, I would have done it years ago. Not so easy to let go. I remember once listening on National Public Radio an interview with Paul McCartney, and they were interviewing him about the song Let It Be, and he was saying that even to this day he just doesn't know how those words came into him and through him. Whispering words of wisdom, let it be. And there's a beautiful difference between the quality of letting be and letting go. Can I begin to let be and acknowledge this pain? And perhaps in time I come to accept it. Perhaps in time it begins to let go. But in the meantime, can I just simply acknowledge, allow, let be what's here? So this is an important aspect that I want to just name with you. And again, this love of truth, it's like I want to know what draws us in is this love of truth. This love of truth, of wanting to know. I love the word intimacy, and if you slow down that word, it says, into me I see. And this is really the practice of mindfulness and meditation. It's a practice of deep, deep intimacy. Into me I see more clearly. Carl Jung has this very beautiful quote that says, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who look inside awakens. Beautiful. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. But it is kind of counterintuitive. Cynthia Ocelli, she writes about a seed. These seeds we have that plant things. She says, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. And for someone who doesn't understand growth, it would actually look like complete destruction. The seed blossoming open. It's quite a practice. Jennifer Wellwood, another deep practitioner with meditation, and she wrote this teaching poem. Again, it really goes into this principle of turning into the skid, if you will. So she's willing to experience these very painful feelings and then discovers what happens as she lets herself feel them. I know perhaps for many of us, the moving towards something, it can become so big that we have the fear that we're just going to lose ourselves in it. So I don't want to appear to be too macho, like my friend wanting to sit those 3 hours and think, I'll never do that again. And I don't want you I'm not necessarily saying you have to go feel all the deepest pain in the world. But perhaps we can begin to dip our toes in. Dip them in and dip them out, dip them in, dip them out. Gradually there's some acclimation as we dip in and dip out. So she writes in her poem, willing to experience aloneness. So evidently she was experiencing a lot of aloneness. Allowing herself to sink into that aloneness. And then she says, I discover connection everywhere. So willing to experience aloneness, I discover connection everywhere. Turning to face my fears, I meet the warrior who lives within. In opening to my losses, I gain the embrace of the universe. Surrendering into emptiness, I find fullness without end. For each condition I flee from, it pursues me. While each condition I welcome transforms me. Very powerful teaching. Each condition I flee from pursues me, while each condition I welcome transforms me. So easy does it. And I just want to acknowledge your courage and vulnerability to be here and to be with yourself. Not distracting, but to pay attention on purpose to what is arising in the here and now. And I know at the end of usually a second full day of practice, for some of us it might feel a little bit discouraging, and we have this idea that meditation's going to be, my mind's going to go blank, it's all going to be peaceful, and instead, this is what Bhante Gunaratana describes it as. He wrote, somewhere in this process of meditation, you will come face to face with the sudden realization that you are completely crazy, that your mind is a shrieking madhouse on wheels barreling down the hill, utterly out of control and hopeless. Not a problem. You're not any crazier than you were yesterday. Perhaps it's always been this way, but you just haven't noticed. Can anybody, does that sound familiar? Is anybody's mind like a shrieking madhouse barreling down the hill, utterly out of control and hopeless? Can anybody relate to that? Yeah. This is normal. Normal, normal, normal. And it's actually very important to know that it's normal. And we've been saying that the teachings that we're doing is from the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And as we mentioned, the first foundation is of the body, the second is of feeling tones, the third is mind states, and the fourth are these collections of teachings that support deeper wisdom. And it's very interesting to say that one of the first teachings in that 4th foundation, the collection of teachings, is how to work with the hindrances that come up when you meditate. And I love that it's actually taught right in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. That teaching is right inside there in the collection, in the dharmas, the collection of teachings. And it was very reassuring to me, normalizing to me, that even written in the meditation texts, as well as teachers who I've studied with, how normal it is during particularly the first couple of days to be experiencing a lot of hindrances while we're practicing. And whether you're new to practice, whether you're experienced, you will encounter these hindrances. And I think it's very helpful to know that they're normal. It's like I'm the only one in the room with a shrieking madhouse on wheels, my mind. And then you saw probably as you looked around, other people were nodding their heads like, oh, okay, I'm crazy, but at least there's a lot of other people here that are crazy like me. And so just to help to normalize this. And, a friend of mine says that first couple of days of a week-long meditation retreat is like staying in a garbage dump. It's just like, like all the shit just flying around. I'm restless and I'm bored and I'm angry and I want and I don't want. And, like all this type of stuff can be here. So it's just very normal for us to have these types of challenges. So I want to speak about them tonight. And want to also speak about, so maybe that's the darkness. And then the light is another teaching that is found right in the 4th foundation of mindfulness in the collection of teachings of the dharmas, which is called the factors of awakening, which is a powerful antidote to these challenges that we experience. So classically saying there's 5 hindrances that are often talked about, and of course these are just large headings for many that are underneath it. But in short, we could say that the first hindrance is this sense of wanting or desiring or craving. The second is its opposite, aversion, not wanting, hating. The third is restlessness with its counterpart, boredom. The fourth is sleepiness, and the fifth is doubt. Anybody experience any of these in the last couple of days? Yeah. This is normal. It's so important to know that this is normal. And it's important to acknowledge these challenges, to normalize them. Maybe not feel so alone. That maybe I had this feeling early on as I meditated that I'm not doing it right. Because, you look around the room, you open your eyes, and boy, it looks like everyone else really got it. They're sitting there, and it's looking good, and like, what the heck's going on with me? So I want to just unpack a little bit about this, these 5 hindrances. So the first is this wanting mind or desiring mind, and it's built upon wanting something better. And sometimes while we're sitting here, we might have seen somebody with some nice shoes, and while you're sitting here, you're already planning on going on to Amazon at the end of I don't work for Amazon, going to Zappos, and I'm going to go order these shoes, or you see a nice shawl, or this is kind of interesting, this thing that Bob has is kind of this thing, and you can kind of take it off and put it here, it'd be very portable, and it's all like the mind just starts tripping out. It starts like, I want this, I want that. And before you know it, your meditation is all about wanting. Want more money, more movies, want to get a new shawl. This retreat is so wonderful. I can't wait for my next retreat. It's going to be really wonderful too. It'll be happy ever after. I'm falling in love with this person nearby me. I've never had a conversation with them, but they look pretty interesting. So it goes on and on, the wanting, the wanting, the wanting. So it's important to know that can come up, and conversely, the opposite can come up. I don't like the food, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too clean, it's too dirty, it's too many Buddhas here, why isn't the flowers going more? Why do we need a sunny day? I wish I had different food. We call this the Vipassana vendetta. Everything is pissing you off. I'm sitting off in the meditation hall and I'm just fucking pissed off. I'm just like, ugh. I don't like this. So this is also normal that we experience this. I want it to be different. So that it's kind of the wanting and not wanting. You see how they're connected. Somehow, the moment is not measuring up. I want it to be different. Restlessness is very uncomfortable. It's like a caged tiger going back and forth and like crawling out of my skin. Like, get me out of here. And actually, restlessness, if we look at it, it's unharnessed energy. There's a lot of energy there, but how do I harness it in such a way that it's more constructive in my meditation practice rather than non-productive or sometimes even destructive? I'm out of here. I'm never going to meditate the rest of my life. And also its counterpart, boring. I'm sitting here bored. This is just boring. B-O-R-I-N-G. Let's see if I can spell it backwards. G-N-I-R-O-B. How would you pronounce that now? Let me see. I can spin out a lot trying to think about how I can pronounce boring backwards. G-B, something like that. But you have a lot of time on your hands when you're meditating. You can think up a lot of stuff. A friend of mine, during the Beatles time, he put on the Beatles' White Album. Didn't even have an audio download. It was in his mind. I'll just play Dear Prudence. And so, there's this sense of restlessness, boredom that can arise. And so I just want to also normalize this. This is just so normal for us to experience this. Whether we are new to the practice or seasoned, we will experience restlessness. Fourth practice, the fourth hindrance is sloth and torpor, or sleepiness. Sloth and torpor are very kind of old English words, but it can mean like sluggishness, tiredness, spaciness, fogginess. It's this sense of not being fully awake, not being fully asleep. It's kind of in this netherland, neither perception nor perception, hypnagogic. Anybody have that experience? Yeah. I think there's a lot of that going around these days. Dullness. So this is very normal as well. And the last is doubt, which is really insidious. Doubt really questions, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. Why did I go on this retreat? I could have done something a lot nicer than this. And I just don't get this. I mean, people told me about meditation, but I don't know what it's going to do for me. So we can have these types of feelings too, a lot of doubt. What am I doing here? Will this really help me? Will this really help me? So sometimes we'll experience doubt, and sometimes we'll experience what I like to call in an acronym an MHA, which means a multiple hindrance attack. And there's nothing quite more uncomfortable than wanting, not wanting, restlessness, sleepiness, and doubt almost all happening at the same time. It's a very uncomfortable experience. And again, I want to point to you that this is all normal. And I think what's very powerful to speak about these and to say them out loud and to name them, it's like, oh, okay, I see that they're there now. Like the antidote for all of these hindrances begins with mindfulness. Because the moment I realize that I am stuck, I can begin to get myself unstuck. Just like I know many of you are in the mindfulness world, and so you know about the difference between reactivity and responding. And that reactivity is being fueled by these old patterns that are unaware, but once I become aware, I can begin to respond differently. So again, the antidote of mindfulness with these hindrances is so incredibly important. The moment I realize I've been lost in a rumination of desire or hate or restlessness or whatever, that's a moment where I have momentarily disengaged from that cyclic reaction. once I become aware, I have a choice. I can begin to respond differently. Again, that beautiful quote from Viktor Frankl, between the stimulus and the response there's a space. In that space lies my freedom to choose. It's important to understand that the hindrances, that the reason they are called hindrances is because they hinder, or they kind of delay or interrupt or interfere the steadying of our mind and our body. That's why they're hindrances. They hinder that steadying, that building of concentration. There's an old simile in the teachings of the Dharma, the simile of a lake. And the object is, of course, with clear water, you can see directly to the bottom if it's clear water. But if you're filled with a lot of wanting and desires, it's like red dyes on the water that obscures so you can't see clearly to the bottom. And if you're filled with a lot of aversion, hatred, not wanting, then it's like water that's boiling so you can't see through. If you're feeling restless, it's like strong winds, choppy waves in water that you can't see through because of the choppiness. I love this one. The metaphor of sleepiness is like the water is covered with algae. You can't see through. It's all with algae. And then the last doubt is like muddy water. Things are getting stirred up. You can't see through. So where our practice is to work with these, to investigate these. The common antidote, as I mentioned, is awareness, and I'm going to speak about this in just a few minutes. But I want to first just say that in the traditional teachings, as well as the antidote of awareness, of mindfulness, is that sometimes when we're filled with a lot of desire, a lot of wanting, sometimes it may be skillful and helpful to reflect upon the brevity of life, that things are impermanent, that everything is changing. Filled with a lot of aversion, hatred, not wanting, perhaps the antidote of these practices can be supportive of practicing compassion, of loving kindness. Practicing of restlessness is perhaps developing some concentration, some one-pointedness to begin to harness this mind that has become so unwieldy. The antidote of sleep is to open the eyes. Imagine you're sitting on the edge of a 3,000-meter cliff, and one false move, you're dead. That will keep you awake. Doubt, I think sometimes one of the classic things is reflecting on the refuges, reflecting on inspiration, reflecting on times when you have practiced in it and it's giving you some more peace or some more understanding about your life. So I want to speak about, these are some of the classical Dharma practices that we can use to help as an antidote for the hindrances, but I also want to speak about the importance of these practices of awakening that are, to me, are the most important antidotes. And again, housed right in that fourth foundation of mindfulness, the collection of teachings, right next to the 5 hindrances, is what's known as the 7 factors of awakening. So I'd like to maybe just share a little bit about that as well. And these factors, they are mindfulness and investigation, effort, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So I'd like to speak about these. And again, this antidote that once we become aware, this quality of mindfulness, this is a very incredible quality. Once we become aware again that we're caught, we can get ourselves uncaught. mindfulness is this incredible ability that we as human beings have. You don't have to be a Buddhist to be mindful. Mindfulness is a birthright. Every one of us as human beings have the ability to be present, to be here, as life unfolds from one moment into the next. And Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about it as the miracle of mindfulness, and I think it really is. It is miraculous. This quality of being here. He says, he's sometimes it's said like the miracle is not necessarily that you can fly in the sky or walk on water. The miracle is you can walk on this earth and be present and experience it as it is. Jan sometimes shared this story, and I have as well, of a story of some mindfulness of a moment, and that's with our younger son, Bodhi. Talking about Bodhi each night now. And our son Bodhi he's got a lot of energy, and particularly growing up had a lot of energy, and getting him to sleep at night was a major victory. He was a flip-flopper. You ever see one of those kids that just lie in the bed and then 2 seconds later flipping to another side and flipping this way, going upside down, just it takes a while to get this guy down. Well, one night Jan was reading books and telling stories, and he's flipping and flopping, and finally he's getting a little quiet, and I think she was getting happy. And to be able to go out of the room and do some other things, and his breathing got very kind of regular and sounded like he was falling asleep, and everything's just all right. And Jan starts to get up and start to walk towards the door, and all of a sudden Bodhi jumps up in his bed and goes, "Mom, Mom!" And Jan says, "Yes, what?" And he's saying, "I just can't believe it. I just can't believe it." And what can't you believe? What's happening? And Bodhi's saying, "Mom, I'm here. You're here. We're here. We're here. We're alive. This is a moment." Something like that. So just he's like, I love how he could just make a snap, like, this is a moment. We're alive. How many of us we've had these moments, or our kids have had these moments, like this moment of aliveness, of mindfulness. It's incredible. So this is the first factor of awakening is mindfulness itself. Interrupts the cycle of our old past patterns. It wakes us up to what's happening now. And then the second factor is investigation. And again, this is born out of the love of truth. Into me I see. I want to know. I want to understand what's here. It's an incredible quality, investigation. If we kept investigation, everything in life, no matter what happens to us, we can transform it, to learn from it, to investigate it. It's the love of truth. In the teachings of the Dharma, there's a famous sutta teaching from the Buddha called the Kalama Sutta. And in that teaching, he says, don't believe the teacher because the teacher says so. Don't believe the books because the books say so. Don't believe by hearsay. See for yourself with your own direct experience to know what is true or not. See for yourself with your own direct experience. It's a beautiful teaching. So it's not like any type of blind faith into the Dharma teachings, but see for yourself with your own experience. Test it out. See if there's truth to this or not. He also teaches in that sutta another beautiful teaching called the criterion on how to know what's the criterion for discerning what is a good path to follow. And it's very interesting. He doesn't say my path is the one to follow, but he speaks about if whatever path you follow upon, Is it lessening your greed, your hatred, and ignorance, or is it growing it? And that using that as a criterion to discern if this is a path to follow. So it's using our qualities of investigation, but also seeing in whatever path we follow, is it benefiting us? Are we growing with more contentment, with more open-heartedness, getting less confused and getting more clear, or its opposite? So this quality of investigation, the curiosity, the wanting to know, the love of truth. And so in working with these hindrances that are arising, wanting or not wanting, restlessness, sleepiness, with doubt, perhaps this antidote of mindfulness and investigation and so forth can be very, very helpful. The moment I realize that I'm caught in some wanting, I might want to get curious about it. Like, what is really being longed here? Why isn't this moment measuring up to my expectations? Why am I keep on falling asleep and not being here? What's fueling and driving my restlessness or my doubt? And so that's why sometimes you'll hear Jan and I ask us, well, I was having a really difficult moment. And often our question is, well, how do you meet that moment with mindfulness? And so the invitation here is no matter what comes up, once you become aware that it comes up, can we begin to investigate it? Like I'm feeling really frustrated. Well, all right. How about turning awareness? Now that you're aware of frustration, could I begin to investigate frustration? Now that might seem crazy to many people, but for one that wants to know the truth and wants to understand what's fueling and driving our suffering, is actually a very valid question. Pema Chodron, she speaks about, for many people, feelings like anger, sadness, fear, confusion, shame, greed, hatred is bad news. But for a spiritual warrior, one who really wants to know the truth, she says it's not bad news, it's actually good news. And why is it good news? Because she says it's showing you exactly where you're stuck, where you actually need to bring more attention to rather than less. That is a beautiful teaching. It's showing you, as she says, with terrifying clarity, exactly where you're stuck and where perhaps I need to bring even more attention to if we want to know what's true, if we want to understand what's driving and fueling our pain. That understanding will begin to set us more and more free. Free of perhaps these stories that we have believed and identified with, that we can begin to see through them. So with that, mindfulness brings up that quality of investigation. From investigation, it brings up a sense of energy. So again, this is the third factor of awakening. And it's not like you don't have to follow like a recipe. It naturally happens. When you become aware and get interested, that feeds your energy. I want to know. It's being driven by this sense of I want to know what's there. And that can bring upon the other qualities of joy, happiness, because I want to know. And with that happiness, I begin to get more settled. I begin to feel more settled, more calm, more tranquil. The joy leads to tranquility, to serenity. And that serenity leads to a sense of more concentration, more steadiness, which ultimately brings us to a place of greater balance and equanimity. Equanimity not meaning disassociation, complacency, apathy. It's equanimity of understanding the nature of things. I love one translation of equanimity is that you don't get as caught or as upset about things when things don't go your way. I like that. When things don't go your way, you get a little less stuck. You get a little less unstuck from that. Because in some ways, through this practice, we've begun to lessen that sense of grasping, lessen that sense of aversion, lessen that sense of not seeing clearly into things. We don't get as caught when things don't go our way. We understand in life it has its ups, it has its downs. We have some wisdom. We have some understanding. Perhaps we even have some levity. Ram Dass, a spiritual teacher, someone once asked him after 40, 50 years of meditation and all these types of consciousness expanding experiences, whether all of his neuroses went away, and he said, certainly not, but I consider them to be more like my pets now. And so there's a kind of a sense of having some levity, perhaps not taking ourselves so seriously, not taking it so personally. But it's also, in the same sense, we can't bypass our personality. But it is within our personality that we can learn about ourselves to become more free. I've spoken a lot, so I'm just going to pause for a moment. So I want to just invite you in these days coming up, if you're feeling reasonably safe, and what's drawing upon you is this awareness and this love of truth, what would it be like to begin to turn into these challenges or these pains? To listen to them. Maybe there'll be a ruby buried inside there. So tonight I think I want to just, hopefully wanting to offer a context of how do I begin to meet these challenges. Now, I name them classically: the wanting, the not wanting, the restlessness, the sleepiness and doubt, but also we can expand to different emotions that are coming up: shame, fear, anger, sadness, confusion. That what would it be like to begin to acknowledge them as part of your practice? To meet them, to allow, to let be. And that you could begin to engage and work with them rather than being held hostage by them. And this is very empowering for all of us if we begin to feel more empowered, that we can begin to take responsibility to our suffering, to our challenges, that I can begin to meet these and work with these and begin to learn from these rather than perhaps just feeling like I'm being held hostage by them and what can I do? Ultimately, in the teachings of the Dharma, it says that our mind is the creator of our own heavens and our own hells through our own thoughts. And so can we begin to take this responsibility for our own mind, to begin to investigate it, to begin to discover perhaps the rubies that are buried inside, the possibility of deeper freedom, being able to see through these stories that have enslaved us. Woman, the Zen poet, not woman, woman. He says, 10,000 flowers in the spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in the summer, snow in the winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. So we'll just sit for a few minutes in this brief moment together, perhaps in the best season of our own life. And so I'd like to just end with a very short reading from Patrick Overton. It says, when I come to the edge of all the light that I know, and I step off into the darkness of the unknown, I will trust one of two things to happen. That I will find some firm ground to stand upon, or I will be taught to fly. When I come to the edge of all that I know and I step off into the abyss of the unknown, I will trust one of two things to happen. That I will find some firm ground to stand upon, or I will be taught to fly. May all beings find the gateways into the heart, and may there be peace. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and be some walking practice now. And just to let you know, I have a prearranged Zoom call tonight at 9 o'clock that I would like to attend to, so I won't be here for the last sit, and Jen will be here, and then of course see you in the morning, but just wanted to let you know so that you're not wondering where is Bob. Thank you all very much.
Reminder about the tea
And the tea, that's at 9:30.
No, I think it's now.
The tea in the cafe is now 9:30.
No.
And also just to say, I put up on the board